The studio lights burned brightly across the stage as the audience settled into their seats, buzzing with excitement for another explosive live episode of The View. Producers rushed through the aisles with headsets pressed tightly against their ears while cameras glided silently into position. Backstage, tension already floated through the air long before the opening music began. Janet Jackson stood near the makeup station, calm on the outside but visibly exhausted underneath the polished smile she wore for television. She had agreed to appear on the show to discuss her upcoming documentary and her thoughts about the music industry, but rumors online had already suggested the interview might become confrontational. Some blogs claimed one of the hosts planned to question her harshly about old controversies from her career. Janet adjusted her dark blazer and took a deep breath as a stage assistant signaled it was time. The audience erupted into applause when she walked onto the set. The hosts greeted her with smiles, though not all of them looked genuine. One host leaned forward immediately, already prepared with notes scattered across the desk. At first, the interview flowed smoothly. Janet spoke warmly about her fans, her family, and how she had learned to protect her peace after decades in the spotlight. The audience listened carefully, laughing at her jokes and applauding her thoughtful answers. But then the atmosphere shifted. One host cleared her throat and smiled thinly before asking, "Do you think celebrities sometimes avoid accountability by blaming the media for everything?" The audience went quiet. Janet blinked slowly. "I think the media can create narratives that aren't always fair," she answered carefully. The host pressed further. "But isn't it also true that some stars use victimhood to stay relevant?" Another uncomfortable silence filled the studio. Janet's smile faded slightly. "I've spent my life working hard. I don't think surviving criticism is victimhood," the crowd murmured softly. One co-host tried to lighten the mood with a nervous laugh, but the tension was already growing. Backstage, producers exchanged worried looks while monitoring, social media reactions pouring in live. The same host leaned forward again. "Some people feel you've avoided certain questions for years." Janet crossed her arms gently. "Like what?" The host hesitated, only briefly before mentioning painful moments from Janet's past, including old scandals and public criticism that had followed her for decades. The audience reacted immediately with gasps. Janet stared silently for several seconds. "I came here to talk about growth and healing," she said quietly. "Not to relive every attack I've already survived." One of the other hosts jumped in, trying to calm things down. "Maybe we should move toward your documentary." But the argumentative host interrupted again. "People still deserve answers." Janet's eyes narrowed. "Answers for what exactly? Existing? Being judged more harshly than others?" Applause suddenly burst from parts of the audience. The host looked surprised by the reaction, but continued anyway. "Public figures can't expect immunity from criticism. And critics shouldn't expect cruelty to be entertainment," Janet replied sharply. The room exploded into loud cheers. The producers backstage panicked as the exchange became more intense than expected. One assistant whispered that network executives were already calling. The host's expression hardened. "Are you saying anyone who questions you is cruel?" "No," Janet answered calmly. "I'm saying there's a difference between journalism and humiliation." For a moment, nobody spoke. The audience could feel the emotional weight hanging in the studio. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure where the conversation would go next. Then the host laughed dismissively. That single laugh changed everything. Janet slowly removed the microphone, clipped to her jacket, and placed it gently on the table. "I didn't come here to be disrespected," she said. The audience erupted again, this time louder than before. Some people stood to applaud her while others watched in stunned silence. One co-host reached toward Janet. "Please wait. We can reset." But Janet stood from her chair. "I've spent too many years allowing people to rewrite who I am," she said firmly. "Not anymore." Backstage, producers rushed toward the stage entrance. One executive could be heard shouting through a headset, demanding the segment cut to commercial immediately. The screen behind the hosts flickered briefly as confused staff members scrambled to regain control. The argumentative host tried speaking again. "You're overreacting." Janet turned slowly. "No, I'm finally reacting appropriately." The crowd exploded with applause so loud it drowned out nearly everything else. As Janet began walking off stage, Several audience members stood up completely, clapping and cheering her name. Even some crew members looked emotional. The remaining hosts sat awkwardly at the table. One stared down at her notes while another rubbed her forehead nervously. The show suddenly cut to commercial. Backstage chaos erupted instantly. Producers argued in hushed voices, while publicists frantically typed statements onto their phones. Security guards carefully guided Janet toward her dressing room as reporters outside the studio already began posting dramatic headlines online. Inside the dressing room, Janet sat quietly in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection beneath the bright lights. Her manager entered carefully. "You okay?" he asked softly. Janet nodded after a long pause. "I'm tired of people thinking dignity is weakness." Outside, the internet exploded. Clips from the confrontation spread across social media within minutes. Millions of viewers debated who was right and who had crossed the line. Some accused the show of disrespecting a legendary artist for ratings, while others argued tough questions were part of television. But the strongest reaction came from fans. Thousands praised Janet for standing up for herself calmly instead of allowing the conversation to become crueler. Videos of the audience applauding her exit quickly went viral across every platform. Hours later, leaked reports claimed network. Executives were furious about how badly the interview had spiraled out of control. Rumors spread that several producers blamed the host who kept pushing Janet during the segment. The next morning, headlines everywhere carried the same dramatic message. Janet Jackson walks off The View after explosive on-air clash. But for Janet, the moment wasn't about scandal. It was about reclaiming control of her own voice after years of letting others define her story.